The living room, like all the other rooms, is part of my father's house. And in my father's house, I do not have to hold my breath. There's a portrait of my father that hangs like a monument in the living room of our home. For most of my childhood, the living room was scarcely meant for living. We held our breaths whenever we found ourselves on one of those ageless teaks, gluing our hands where the knees met, spined in borrowed postures. Because of how strange its inhabitants were, the living room always felt like it had a border of its own, like it had a regime of its own and a constitution of its own. And in the event of a native wanting to meet the children of the house, we entered, my sister and I, merely tourists parroting a culture they did not know. I digress. There is a portrait of my father that hangs like a monument in the living room of our home, and it breaks me that a man like my father can be reduced to an image. I've never needed a reminder of what my father looked like, largely because of how often I am told that I look so much like him. In any case, I can recall the crease and fold of his lean face from when the cancer was only a journalistic read and not a problem of our own. And if I were to describe him, I'd begin with his neck. He had a prominent Adam's apple accompanied by a deep yet gentle voice. His complexion resembled brown, opulent earth, and his eyes, in their ordinariness, were reservoirs of love. Sadly, I also remember my father's shrunken frame when the disease became far too familiar. The painting has now become an artifact for the three of us, primary evidence, if you will, of a time when my father was at the helm. We've become historians in the process too, analyzing his hairline, interpreting his thoughts, rewriting a past in hopes that it would repair an irreparable loss, all in the reclusiveness of private, silent engagements with an image of a man who meant the whole world. To salvage whatever I can from a time I loved, I return to this room often. Lately, with this roguish disregard that irks my mother, for her, the sanctity of the room never really wore off, partly because of the shrine of Christ and partly the portrait. This week, a beloved pot of peace lilies has also made the list. I sit reclined on one of these teaks and, tucking a foot beneath my bottom, I cling to whatever the painting has to offer. Some days, it is an ordinary assemblage of color and wood. Other days, it is everything that holds me together. I resign fully from the inhibitions I once knew, in a kind of surrender to what really I do not know. But a single thought hangs in my head. The living room, like all the other rooms, is part of my father's house. And in my father's house, I do not have to hold my breath.